elected office, Mayor Bass was on the front lines of healthcare in South Los Angeles with a distinguished career largely dedicated to combating the crack cocaine epidemic. Mayor Bass's career as an elected official began in 2004 when she was elected to the California State Assembly, and only 4 years later, she became the first African-American woman in the United States history to serve as Speaker of a state legislative body. And I might add, not just any legislative body, but California is the most populous state in the union, housing some 10% of all Americans. In 2010, Karen Bass was elected to the United States Congress, where among other roles, she served as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and helped pass landmark legislation on child welfare, pandemic relief, small business support, and infrastructure. She also served as chair of the Africa Subcommittee of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. As mayor, she has focused on addressing LA's many pressing challenges, and she has done so while LA experienced the most destructive natural disaster in its history, the wildfires of last January. And to top it off, she is faced with the Trump administration's deploying of the National Guard and the U.S. Marine Corps in Southern California to ostensibly round up undocumented immigrants, to name just a couple of the extraordinary challenges confronted by Mayor Bass and her administration. And you'll hear more about those challenges tonight. To engage Mayor Bass in dialogue, we welcome the illustrious Patt Morrison, who is well known to our America at a Crossroads audience. Pat has a many decades-long career both in broadcast journalism and is currently a columnist with the Los Angeles Times. She has a massive number of awards, Emmys, Golden Globes, part of a Pulitzer, and is the only one of our moderators, and maybe the only moderator in the world, who has a vegetarian hot dog named after her at LA's legendary and iconic Pink's hot dog stand. So if you're in LA, be sure to go to Pink's and order a Patt Morrison dog. Anyway, thank you both for being with us, and thank you to our audience. Pat, the conversation is yours.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you to all the people who support these vital programs, and to our audiences across the United States and around the world joining us right now. And to those audiences, Mayor Bass, I welcome you. And they may not have seen or heard much about what's going on in Los Angeles since they saw the network coverage of the immigration protests. But now the Trump administration has sued the city of Los Angeles. Why are they suing Los Angeles? What is the beef here?
Well, Pat, first of all, it's wonderful to see you and to participate in this interview. Let me just say that the way I described it yesterday, literally when I got into my office, the first thing they did was handed me the lawsuit. And it just felt like it is now an all-out assault on the city of Los Angeles. And my view of it is that this is the Trump administration testing the nation's second largest city to see, and the state of California, to see how far they can push the needle. The lawsuit specifically is calling for an injunction on our sanctuary city law, part of which has been in effect for the last 4 decades, originally was put in place to protect a growing immigrant community that was being preyed on by the criminal element that were afraid to go to law enforcement. And so to protect them, to tell them that they should go to law enforcement to report crimes, the LAPD came up with the policy that basically said they would not cooperate with immigration enforcement. Obviously, decades later, this has taken on a different level of attention. That drew the Trump administration to attack cities across the country for their sanctuary city policies, but to focus in on Los Angeles. So in my opinion, we are a petri dish. They're experimenting with us, and it's a very dangerous experiment with our democracy.
For those of you who don't know about this, the Special Order 40 by the LAPD was instituted in 1979 by a conservative police chief who said that he couldn't police the city of Los Angeles if people who were witnesses or victims to crime were afraid of being questioned for their immigration status rather than for the nature of the crime that had been committed against them or which they witnessed. And that was the origin of these policing orders. But Mayor, the Trump administration says that this is unconstitutional, that immigration is a federal responsibility, and Los Angeles has no business entering into it.
Yes, 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 yes. That is what they're saying. But from my point of view, as mayor of the city, my number one job is to protect Angelinos. And unfortunately, I feel like we've been preyed upon by the administration. Everything in Los Angeles was fine on June 5th. Things got out of hand when people were outraged by the raids that began to take place on January 6th and now have taken on a character of masked men in unmarked cars, jumping out of their cars with guns, with uniforms that in some cases are suspect, almost look like they got them online, arresting people with no warrants, random folks. You remember that the original policy was we were going to go after hardened criminals, gang members, and drug dealers. And from there, as I understand it, Stephen Miller changed the emphasis that we now need to detain 3,000 people a day nationally to meet the goal of deporting more people than any other administration in history. And so playing that out in Los Angeles, our immigrant city, made us easy prey. But then I think that there was a history of anger and resentment toward California for many reasons, most of which have to do with various levels of policy that we champion in our state and we're very proud of, but the administration disagrees with an array of policies, most of which are not related to immigration.
You've said that the city is going to defend the policies. You're going to stand up for Angelinos. What form, what shape does that take?
Well, what it takes is a legal strategy. And we know that we have concerns with the courts. We obviously can't rely on them in the way that we did in the past because he began to transform the courts in his first presidency. And I think a lot of times people forget those 4 years when they systematically appointed extremely conservative 40-year-old judges. And that was a clear strategy to implement policies that they are doing. And they gave us the script. They gave us the book, Project 2025. Flood the zone is the strategy. And I feel like they are flooding the zone in Los Angeles, hitting us so many ways. And I think one of the most powerful ways that they have impacted our state is the federal seizure of power from our governor, taking away his ability to control the National Guard and deciding that Los Angeles needed the National Guard, even though we never asked, nor did we need their presence.
Now, in 2017, the first Trump administration also tried to challenge sanctuary cities with the same kind of policies that Los Angeles has, and a federal judge who then had a nationwide say, which isn't the case now, said,
Right.
no, you can't do that. What has changed? Is it the judiciary that has changed? I'm trying to get into that strategy that you talk about pushing back against the Trump administration.
Right. And my overall analysis is we really only have one branch of government now because the federal courts rejected that before they were able to appoint the 40-year-old conservative judges. And so there was pushback. We are concerned about the pushback now. We're going to try a legal strategy. And then, there are the protests that are taking place in our city. And we know that protests are a part of our DNA in the United States. And we have a long history of protesting for immigrant rights in the city of Los Angeles. But there is only one acceptable kind of protest, and that is peaceful, organized, nonviolent protests. And so I know that that will continue because the masses need an outlet. But my strategy, my approach is going to be a legal strategy. But having said that, Pat, you probably know because you know me. I'm in conversation with Republicans. I'm in conversation with contacts that I have in and around the administration because I'm going to always hope that somewhere along the line there might be the ability to negotiate to, get them to pull back, especially from the anonymous, what feels like and looks like an awful lot of time, just snatching people off the street arbitrarily.
You spoke of Republicans, and although elections in the county of Los Angeles and the city, as elsewhere at that level in California, are nonpartisan, the opponent you defeated when you became mayor was a Republican named Rick Caruso, who has himself protested against the presence of the troops as unnecessary. And the Republicans in the California state legislature have also appealed to President Trump to essentially draw back from this, to stand down.
Yes, I think that is a tremendous development, especially coming from the Republicans in the state legislature. And that was a bold move for them. You know, I served 12 years in Congress, and even though many of my Republican colleagues disagreed with the president, thought that, you know, he in some instances was just so far out of line, but they are frightened. And you know what is scary, Pat, is that before January 6th, they would say that, well, I have to go along with him. I know it's wrong, but I don't want to be primaried. After January 2nd, their tune changed. It was, I have to go along with him because I'm afraid for my life and my family. That was chilling to hear them say that they felt physically threatened if they did not go along with the president.
So, what is it that is up for discussion right now between the Trump administration and the city? Is there a threat, implicit or explicit, about withholding funds from the city of Los Angeles unless the city does X, Y, or Z?
No, that has not been made yet. I think we have heard the national threat. We've heard him say that. We've heard him make threats over diversity, which is really tragic. We've heard him make threats over Sanctuary City. We have not received a direct threat. And then, ironically, it's been a while since we talked. You know, with the wildfires, the Trump administration poured resources on us, which was one of the reasons why we were able to clear over 3,000 lots in such a short period of time in the Palisades, and people are beginning to rebuild. So we had a very large number, the largest in recent history, dispatched, deployed to Los Angeles from the Army Corps of Engineers that got the job done. And while we felt, and I felt personally, like we were beginning to build a relationship, several of my former colleagues are now secretaries of agencies or high up in the administration. And I felt like there was hope for a relationship, but kind of the inconsistency, which is consistent in the administration. The minute things were going along, then there was the attack, and that's why it has felt like an all-out assault.
Do you expect that whatever negotiations are going to get underway, that the Trump administration will demand what? That the city suspend sanctuary?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that he will tell us to change our environmental laws, our diversity law, laws, yes, sanctuary city. I have to be hopeful. I have to continue to pursue a dialogue, and I will continue to do that. But nothing has happened at this point. So I can't tell you. I will tell you what we need to have happen, which is we need to have the random seizure of folks on the street stop. We need to have the officers, whoever they are, identify themselves and not be masked. If they're going to drive in unmarked cars, we need to know who they are. It is a very frightening thing if you think about it, because you have law enforcement from a lot of different agencies. We don't know how they're trained. We don't know where they come from, the protocols, the practice that we have here in our Los Angeles Police Department can be very, very different from people who are coming from out of state. And then, of course, there's the fear that in some states, civilians have been deputized and have been sent to Los Angeles. We don't know if that's true. What we do know is true is that there have been imposters. There have been criminals who have masked themselves, put on uniforms similar to the ones that are supposed to be legitimate, and committed crimes. We've seen that happen in other states, but there was someone arrested here in the county just last week or the week before. I don't think he had carried out any crimes, but he was preparing to. He had all of the tools in his car. Fortunately, they were able to stop him.
If you have a question for Mayor Bass, you can put it in the Q&A box, and we'll be getting around to those a little later in the program. Mayor Bass, Attorney General Pam Bondi said that our sanctuary policies in Los Angeles were a driving cause of violence, not only in the protests, but created a general lawlessness in Los Angeles. Have you talked to the LAPD about what actual statistics they know about the city of Los Angeles and what percentage of crimes or even violent crimes are committed by people who are in this country illegally?
Oh, no, I haven't. I thought you were going to refer to the protesters, but we
I'll
know,
get to that.
for example, over 60% of the people that have been detained had no criminal record at all. I certainly know anecdotally that you cannot say that the immigrant population commits any more crimes than any other sector of our city. But the specifics in terms of data, I do not have that information.
And as you point out as well, with the protesters too, I think there were something on the order of 200 arrests. Is that right? A little over 200 arrests during the perhaps week of the protests?
Well, again, Bondi and all of the other ones in DC insisted on this narrative of riots. And Pat, you and I were there in 1992. We know what a riot is. What you had in Los Angeles, in our city, of 500 square miles, you had about 2 square miles where there were protests that were overwhelmingly peaceful. And at the end of the protest, you had an element that created vandalism, some violence, and then on one night there was looting. I imposed a curfew. The curfew lasted 72 hours. There has not been a problem since then, and we've had protests almost every day, and there has not been a problem. There was never a need for the National Guard in the first place. You might know that the president gave himself major kudos and said that he saved the day. He did this, tweeted on Saturday night. This was June 7th. He tweeted that he saved the day, he stopped the riots, he quelled the violence because he brought out the National Guard. Pat, the National Guard didn't even arrive until the next day. So it was all lies. We did not need them. This is posturing. This is performance to make it appear as though the city was in flames. They, in fact, said that. It was portrayed that way, especially on certain networks on TV, to create a sense of chaos in our city that never existed. And frankly, as I said before, on June 5th, everything was peaceful in the city. We did not have a problem until the raid started. So, in my opinion, it was a provocation from the administration to essentially get us into a conflict with law enforcement so that they would have an excuse for troops. Now, we just talked about the National Guard. We didn't talk about the deployment of the Marines, our soldiers who are trained to fight to kill overseas. That has nothing to do with dealing with crowd control or a civilian situation.
Now, the explanation for the reason for the National Guard is to protect the ICE agents and federal buildings, and that the Marines were supposed to be doing the same. Now, the network cameras have pretty much gone away, but there still are National Guardsmen in Los Angeles. Where are they and what are they doing?
They're in 2 locations. They're protecting 2 buildings where absolutely nothing is happening. And they're protecting the federal building downtown and the federal building in Westwood. Actually, excuse me, the last time I drove past the federal building in Westwood, it was the Marines standing out there. And I just feel for our young women and men, especially the ones in the National Guard. Those are people who are going about their daily lives and they could called up for a deployment. They have to leave their families, their work, their school. And in many cases, when they have prolonged deployments, they fall behind in their education. They might lose their jobs and they disrupt their families. To use them as a prop, I think is just unconscionable.
We have spoken about law enforcement, but I'd like you to talk a little about the effect that I think many Angelinos have seen on daily life in the city of Los Angeles, on churches, on schools, on parks, on workplaces.
Well, how about on graduations? I mean, this started right before graduations were to take place, and you had a marked decline in attendance, and that's just shameful. A milestone in a family's life to feel that they can't even go attend their kids' graduation. But there are parts of our city that are virtual ghost town. You can go to the Garment District where there's 4,000 independent businesses, and it's a ghost town because there are no customers and the workforce is staying home. I was in East LA on Father's Day at the town center that should have been filled with people, restaurants where there should have been lines outside. To hear a restaurant owner tell me that this was worse than COVID, that was incredible to hear. And he said it was worse than COVID because at least during COVID, people were ordering for delivery, and people weren't even doing that because they're afraid of who might come to their door.
As for the city itself and dealing with the county, I know there have been efforts and measures underway to find counseling, to find legal representation, other resources for people who, as you say, may be here without papers, but who are as you point out, Angelinos like everyone else.
Well, I mean, and they are detaining people who've been here for 20 years, 25 years, going about their day, contributing to our society. But you also have people who are here legally who are being detained. You know, if you're here as a legal resident, once a year, you're required to go to the immigration office and check in and do a report and maintain your status. They've been detaining people who are showing up for their required appointments. Now, you know what's going to happen. That word is going to get out. People are going to be afraid to go to their appointments. They're going to fall out of status, and then they're going to be subject to deportation.
And is the city planning anything or in a position to advise people about their rights and their options in
Well,
many of these circumstances?
yes, the city has been very actively doing that through a variety of ways. Several of our departments that are closest to residents, such as our Parks and Recs and our Community Investment Department. We also are developing and soliciting philanthropic dollars for what we call the Angelino Card that Merrick Garcetti used during COVID to provide cash for families that couldn't work. And we have reinstituted the Angelino Card to provide resources for people. But we are constantly giving people the information that they need. We are fortunate in our city that we have a well-established institutions that have fought on behalf of immigrants for more than 4 decades. And so they know how to go into action immediately. They have a rapid response network so that whenever there are sightings of ICE, they notify the public and the public goes out and bears witness. But it is a little difficult now because you have masked men going out in unmarked cars and you might not know that it's an ICE car. But cars that don't have license plates these days are now suspicious. Cars without license plates and tinted windows, that stands out in a neighborhood where you wouldn't have paid any attention before. Now you have to worry about ICE jumping out. And we use ICE as a general term, but actually people are from a variety of federal agencies, some of which most people have never even heard of.
Attorney General Pam Bondi has denounced the fact that there's an app out there that people download into their phones and report the likely presence of ICE. Is this a good idea? Should citizens be vigilant and letting one another know what they think about where ICE or government agents may be? Is this
Well, I think how that is used is it's used to let people know what their rights are. For example, if it's in a residential area and they're going into a home, the people that turn out might have a bullhorn that says you don't have to open the door. They have to show ID. They have to have a warrant, different things like that. And it's my understanding that they have to have a warrant when they go to a home, but if they want to snatch you off the street, they don't have to have a warrant. That's crazy.
What's the impact on the rebuilding effort? Because Los Angeles had that dreadful 1-2 punch in January with the fires in Altadena, which is a community in the county of Los Angeles, and Pacific Palisades in the city of Los Angeles. The tariffs were already going to be threatening the supply of building materials, and now we have people concerned that construction workers will be picked up and taken away by ICE from work sites or from gathering places where people seek work.
Right. And did they show up in Altadena to intimidate people? Absolutely. I haven't heard about them showing up in Palisades, but Pat, you know, we have entire sectors of our economy that cannot function without immigrant labor, and construction is one of those. I can't say that it has had a direct impact on the Palisades just yet. The workforce is showing up. I was just there this morning. It's very inspiring to see so many lots now that have no debris on them and actually see structures going up. So we are months and months ahead in the Palisades if you compare it to other fires that have happened in the state. So progress is still moving forward, but there is absolutely the looming threat that right around the corner, the workforce in the Palisades could be impacted.
We've been speaking exclusively about what the Trump administration, the executive branch, has been doing, but the House Oversight Committee, you served in Congress for a number of years, has demanded documents, files, communications from you and from Governor Gavin Newsom about what you were saying to one another, what you were talking about during the protests and during the ICE raids that commenced early in June, and had given you a deadline of a couple of weeks ago. Have you complied with that? What are they
Yeah.
looking for?
Yes, we have partially complied, but they didn't give us a lot of time, so we also have to assemble our legal team as well. But I received another letter just the other day. Ironically, I was sitting in a Metro board meeting, an MTA board meeting, and I received a letter from the Secretary of Transportation saying the same thing. I mean, they're basically the implication of both letters is really that I personally was complicit in the vandalism that took place, which is, of course, absurd when it comes to the Secretary of Transportation. Metro, our trains were and buses were shut down for a couple of hours during the protests, and then the buses and trains at different points in time were vandalized. So they're trying to hold me personally responsible for that. And it's the same with the governor. It's really ridiculous. In my opinion, it's just laying the groundwork for a subpoena. When I say an all-out support, all-out assault, I'm talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that we had to spend $30 million the week of the protest that would have never happened if the raids hadn't happened. So they are pressuring us financially, calling for these, ridiculous investigations. And then there are two other investigations not connected to this issue that they're pursuing as well. I received a letter as soon as the administration was formed saying that I needed to be investigated for anti-Semitism. What is that about? There's an investigation from our U.S. attorney on homelessness. So that's why it feels like they are hitting us from every area. And again, I will say that in contrast to what I was saying 2 weeks ago, which is the administration was very helpful in getting us a jump start for the rebuilding of the Palisades.
What do you suppose the House Oversight Committee is trying to do? Is this coordinated with the White House, do you think?
Oh, 100%. I mean, after serving in Congress, I know what these are. Yeah, they're completely choreographed. And the idea is to get me there under oath and to try to draw me in to being complicit to the problems that took place that would not have taken place if they had not initiated the raids.
How do you assess the LAPD's performance? Because as you know, under Special Order 40, it's not supposed, and the sanctuary rules, it's not supposed to cooperate with ICE. It's simply supposed to keep some order. And a lot of Angelinos have looked at what happened and said, it looks to us like maybe the LAPD was acting too much on behalf of the federal government.
I think the LAPD is really put in a very difficult spot. So I'll give you a couple of examples because they were pretty dramatic examples of where it looked as though LAPD was facilitating ICE. There was a call that there was a kidnapping taking place. So LAPD swooped to where the kidnapping was and saw it was a immigration enforcement action. And so there they are in the middle of this. The crowds are upset, and then LAPD is put in a position of maintaining order. I think some of the criticism of LAPD emanates from some of the activity that happened during the protests, the use of less than lethal, the use of tear gas, which is actually not used by the LAPD. But when you have a variety of law enforcement agencies responding to a protest, they have different standards in each of the departments. And so I know that people feel that the LAPD's performance in the protests need to be evaluated. That evaluation has happened. I haven't had a chance to speak to the president of the police commission, but I do know they were in a commission meeting yesterday for probably about 8 or 9 hours.
And does that include the allegations by journalists that journalists were targeted in some instances by the
I'm
LAPD?
sure it does. I'm sure it does. And in today's world where everything is on video, you see snippets of a video
Mhm.
because the LAPD will also point out that 52 officers were injured to the point of having to go to the hospital. So that's injuries, even though they have protective gear. And they had items thrown at them, such as Molotov cocktails and fireworks, heavy duty fireworks. And so, my message is that protest is fundamental to our society, but it must remain peaceful. And I think that we're out of practice in some senses. We grew up seeing Jim Lawson, teaching about nonviolent direct
This is
action.
the Reverend Jim Lawson.
Yes, I'm sorry. Teaching about nonviolent direct action. He's the one that trained Martin Luther King Jr. And some of those tactics need to be examined now. But like is often the case, even after a major sporting event, try a Lakers championship. What happens afterwards? The crowds that assemble. And at the end of the celebration, there's always a few that then begin vandalizing things, climbing up on the light poles, graffitiing areas, smashing the windows in cars, sometimes setting cars on fire. That was the scene that you saw after the protests. And I absolutely denounced it. I said that if people do that, they will be held accountable to the full extent of the law. What some people don't realize, and I've really tried to get this word out, is that people in all of their adrenaline rush, if they commit a crime, especially if they throw something at one of these officers and it happens to be a federal officer, they're going to get major charges. And you have a U.S. attorney who is chomping at the bit to put charges forward, major federal charges. So a lot of education needs to happen, especially with our young people who are extremely angry. But then some of the vandalism just outraged me. The fact that people would vandalize Olvera Street. You're going to talk about a symbol of immigration. I saw a mural of Cesar Chavez that was vandalizing the Japanese American Museum. If you go inside there, the entire exhibit is about the internment of the Japanese. So I don't believe that anybody that engages in that type of behavior, please don't tell me you're concerned about the immigrant community, because you are not. What you are doing is you're inviting the administration to roll out those troops. And we don't need that.
To what extent have you been coordinating your responses with Governor Newsom? Because he's drawn into some of this as well, as you say, the congressional investigation. But he has been very outspoken and using, frankly, pretty pointed humor to counter some of what's been said about Los Angeles and California. And you, as you point out, I have written about you on and off for 30 years. I don't think I've ever seen you as impassioned in your remarks as you have been these last couple of weeks.
Well, I've never experienced an assault like this. This is just, it is absolutely infuriating what is happening and just how unnecessary it was. Our city has been through a lot. Why on earth did we need this grief, especially when I know that it all amounts to a political stunt and an experiment to see how much and how far they can get away with seizing power from a state and local government. You asked about coordination with the governor. I wouldn't say we are coordinating, but we are absolutely in communication all the time. He has his approach, I have my approach. He has his history, I have my history. But there will be coordination, though, that is probably happening amongst our legal advisors because we've both received the same, letter, for example.
Have other cities with sanctuary policies been in touch with Los Angeles or with the city attorney's office, your office,
Mhm.
monitor what's happening and perhaps to brace themselves or to share some strategies?
Thank you for asking that immediately. I'm very active in the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And Monday, after the raid started, I was on a Zoom call with 120 mayors. I immediately called all of the mayors from our county, and we have 88 mayors in our county. I immediately called them up, did a Zoom with them, asked them to come and participate in a press conference. And because we have a lot more capacity than the smaller cities, I have volunteered to assist them with legal advice, opening up our resources and how we have handled things in the past, because we all want to be supportive of each other. And one thing that I think is remarkable, Pat, is that you could imagine in some cities, this would be a very divisive issue. You would have two camps, get rid of those people and then defend those people. This has united our city. I haven't been anywhere where I have not experienced the passionate outrage at how people are treated. On Monday after Father's Day, when I met with two mothers who had to explain to their small children where their fathers were. Actually, they didn't know where their fathers were, but their fathers had been taken. How do you explain that to a small child? That daddy didn't show up for Father's Day and I don't know if and when I'll ever see him again. What the administration has not cared about this administration or the first administration, is the lifelong trauma that has been inflicted on children. I was in McAllen, Texas, when I was chairing the Congressional Black Caucus, and I went and I saw child reunification. I saw children who were just out of being toddlers, who had been taken away from their parents. They had no idea why their parents disappeared. And I saw mothers and fathers see those children for the first time after months. The children couldn't even move, they were in shock. That is trauma that will be with that child forever.
I want to ask you one more question before we go to our audience questions, and that has to do with the World Cup next year and the Olympics in 2028. Have you been in touch with anyone from the U.S. Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee, with their concerns about how these games will come off, given that people are being banned from coming into the United States, that whole countries have the prospect of visitors coming to the United States, and perhaps even coaches and teams who may find themselves barred from coming here by Trump policies?
Well, I think it was actually, yes, the International Olympic Committee was just here. But they were here before the raid started. But I did have a chance, along with the council president and Paul Krikorian, who is our executive director of major events. The three of us had an opportunity to speak at a plenary session with them. However, their concerns then were the fires in terms of would the city be ready? And we absolutely assured them that the city will be ready. And here's the irony once again. President Trump is very concerned about the World Cup. He wants the World Cup to happen. And so the madness that is happening right now, just like they turned on the switch in a positive way in the Palisades, they turned off the switch in a very negative way in terms of immigration. I can see them turning it back on. He's very invested. This is going to be world leaders coming. This is an opportunity to show off our state, to show off our city. It's very important to the administration that we shine. And so I don't feel that because we are being assaulted today, that that will be the case next year. And one thing about this administration, just like the first one, is the uncertainty that is consistent, that characterizes the administration. We've watched this on the world stage. One day we have tariffs, one day we don't. One day minute he's talking to North Korea, the next minute he isn't. So, we have lived with this uncertainty. Now we're in our fifth year living.
Well, is Los Angeles then in a position to say to the administration, hey, we want fans, we want teams to come here. So ABC, here's some suggestions we have. And are you undertaking that? Although I don't know that the timing is very great right now.
Timing is not good right now, but absolutely said that before. And we'll say it afterwards. I have not given up. I do have contacts in the administration. I do have a formal request to speak directly with the president. And as I mentioned, several of my former colleagues are now in the administration playing very significant roles.
Have the World Cup organizers or the IOC expressed specific concerns since this meeting about who may be coming and who may not be allowed to come?
No, no, not yet. That has not happened. Now, you know that there is a separate organization putting on the Olympics, LA28. They have not reached out to me saying that there's concerns from the IOC.
Let's get to some of your questions. Joel has a question. In 1957, he says President Eisenhower nationalized the Arkansas National Guard. This was integrating the schools in Little Rock, and the Democratic governor opposed it. Today, the parties reversed themselves. What's different about that?
Oh, well, I mean, what transformed the Democratic Party in the South was the civil rights legislation that Lyndon Johnson signed and put forward. And he said, when he signed it, that he knew he was going to lose the South and lose the Democratic Party for a generation. It turned out to be multiple generations. So the Democratic Party of those years is nothing like the Democratic Party today. The Democratic Party today represents diversity. It was anything, the Democratic Party then represented segregation.
In 1992, both the mayor, Tom Bradley, and the governor asked for the National Guard to be sent to Los Angeles. And it was by President George H.W. Bush. As you pointed out, this is very different. And a couple of people have asked more about the status of the National Guard. As I understand, some of them who are specifically assigned to firefighting duties have been returned to those duties with President Trump's consent.
Right. Yes. Yes, they have been. And there is absolutely no comparison between 1992, which I called the Rainbow Riot, because it happened all over the city. It was citywide, and it was the worst civil unrest in U.S. history at that point, the most expensive. You remember the airport had to close because the fires, decreased the visibility. You are talking about maybe 2 square miles out of 500 square miles. So it is extremely important that we do not characterize this in any way, shape, or form. I would characterize it as the melee that happens after a Lakers championship and a little more.
Because President Trump said, had he not sent these National Guardsmen in, as you point out, it was delayed by a couple of days longer than he alluded
Well,
to. Los Angeles would have been burning to the ground, his words, and completely obliterated. How do you counter the impression that rhetoric like that makes on the
well,
greater part of the country and the world?
Well, I think it was just important to say that he said that and the National Guard weren't even here. So, I mean, it's not just that they were delayed. He gave the National Guard credit for something when they were not in Los Angeles. So, what kept the peace that day was the Los Angeles Police Department, the Sheriff's Department. We were well equipped to handle it. We did. We never requested the National Guard. There was no need for the National Guard, and there was certainly no need for the President of the United States to seize power from our governor. That's very important.
I do want to apologize because we don't have closed captioning functioning today. Next week it will be back as usual. So my apologies for that. Mayor Alicia and some others want to know how we can get a better handle, given all the pressures on the city right now, on homelessness and how that's figured, if at all, in any of what's going on.
Well, it absolutely, I mean, it's front and center in my agenda. It's the reason why I ran. And I read good news today in the LA Times that homelessness in a couple of our areas was down by 50%. Hollywood, homelessness down by 50%. In Venice, down. This will be the official numbers come out next week, but this will be the second year in a row that we report homelessness on the decline. Specific street homelessness. Sheltered homelessness is up, which is exactly what we want. We want people off of the streets. And prior to that, prior to 2023, homelessness had been going up every year for many, many years from before COVID.
Let's see. Judge Joe and Diana have pretty much the same question. They've heard that the city council is drafting a resolution to require the LAPD to get identification from people who purport to be ICE agents to identify themselves and verify their position, their role. Is that the case? And what's the status of this?
It is the case. It's my understanding they just introduced it and they've also adjourned for the month. So not much will be happening in the month of July.
Is there any prospect of another such confrontation of the sort that we saw at the beginning of June, because ICE agents are still operating in the city of Los Angeles?
Absolutely. I mean, yes, I worry about it every single day because of the nature of the raids. If they keep doing egregious raids, I mean, I looked at one the other day. There was a woman, she was selling fruit, and they grabbed her. She couldn't have been 5 feet tall, but to see six officers grab her, throw her to the ground, I mean, when you see things like that, them chasing, running through parking lots, going after car washes. I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to believe that one of the cartels is running a car wash. So these are innocent people that have been proven. So what are they doing? And this is creating chaos in our city. And so, yes, I worry about something happening every single day. And because we don't know, I wake up in the morning, turn on my phone, and see where the raids are.
We're talking with Mayor Karen Bass, and if you have a question for her, you can put it in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get it to her with the remaining quarter of an hour in this hour. Mayor Rochelle wants to know whether or not, given our conversation earlier about the LAPD's role and what it can and cannot do in terms of immigration actions, why can the LAPD not stop people from being kidnapped, her word, by masked men when we are a sanctuary city?
Well, I mean, just think about that. This is one of the dilemmas of LAPD. What you basically would be calling for is for LAPD to get into a confrontation with the masked men, who may or may not be federal agents. And there's certainly reason to say that they should intervene. But what you're not going to have is the wild, wild west with federal agents in a fight that could wind up in armed conflict with another law enforcement agency. So it has to be figured out. It is absolutely unacceptable for masked men to grab people off the street, and we don't know whether they're criminals or whether they, are federal agents. And so I think that is something that has to be negotiated, but I don't think it's realistic to think that LAPD is going to swoop in and engage in a conflict with federal agents.
Is it realistic to expect that ICE agents will follow some local Los Angeles ordinance and say you have to show your ID?
Well, they did before. I mean, when I talk to immigrant rights organizations who have been dealing with immigration enforcement for decades, they have never seen anything like this before. They did show ID. They did allow legal access for the people that were detained. They did allow the families to have access. So this is a new creature that all of us are dealing with. And I will tell you that even local federal agents are very uncomfortable with what is happening here. They feel disrespected in the sense that they're getting mandates that they don't think are right to do. It is a violation of all of their protocols and their culture, but they're being told to do this. But, again, I go back to the fact that this has not been a divisive issue in our city. This has unified our city. And even the law enforcement officers, and I'm not talking about LAPD now, I'm talking about the local federal officials are appalled by what is going on, but they cannot speak out.
Thomas makes that point when he says he used to work at DHS in Washington, and ICE agents, he said, normally never wore masks, even when going after organized criminals.
Right.
What happened when you tried to get DHS and ICE to get their agents to show badges and stop wearing masks? Was there a formal request, an informal request, an agency to agency discussion?
I think most of it has been informal, because there hasn't been communication. Although that communication is beginning, though. But their reason, and I did speak to them, and their reason is that, well, our officers were doxxed. In other words, their personal information was revealed, and they were subject to attack, and their families were threatened. Well, what do you think happens to LAPD every day? I mean, you're in law enforcement. And LAPD is worse, because remember the releasing of the database inappropriately. So, you can take a picture of any law enforcement officer and you can get all of their information. So that is part of the job. But the idea that you can be masked, and not like a COVID mask. I mean, we've all seen the mask. That is terrifying for anybody.
Norman, who was a professor of law at USC, said citizens and others have been snatched off the street and charged with resisting arrest when defending themselves. How can they get legal help?
Well, there's a team of lawyers that have been helpful, and I would refer him to our immigrant rights infrastructure. CHIRLA, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, is at the center.
Which the Trump administration has spoken out against.
Well, which the Trump administration is, giving the same letters to Angelica Salas. We're both receiving similar letters, because what they're trying to say is that the city is funding the vandalism, and Shirla is responsible for the vandalism, which those of us in Los Angeles, Shirla has been at the leadership of organized peaceful protests for decades. So because you have knuckleheads at the end that cause problems, you cannot charge the major immigration rights organization with decades of history of peaceful protests with the vandalism of a few.
Brenda wants to know about a ruling called Arizona versus the United States, where the Supreme Court found that states and municipalities were not obligated to help the federal government enforce immigration laws. I don't know about that, but does it back up sanctuary city ordinances?
Well, you got me on that one. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not familiar with that case. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I'm sure at some point it'll come up again in
Yeah.
another conversation in another venue. The question of the LAPD gets, and I know we discussed it earlier on, but can you describe for an officer on the street what the limits are of what he or she can do or cannot do if there is an ICE raid going on? Because we've seen video, but the rules governing the behavior are something else different, perhaps, from what we've been seeing in videos.
Well, I can tell you that, and this is my verbal understanding, the chief is going to give me the written documents that he has given to his officers, but basically they cannot interfere. They cannot interfere with a federal action. It's as simple as that because the federal government trumps the local and the state.
But do they have to help? I think the explanation I saw was that they crowd control, traffic control.
Yeah, but the problem with that, Pat, is that the community perceives that as helping. So yes, they're supposed to do crowd control. They have to do that. They have to do crowd control. They have to control the traffic. But the perception of a 2-minute video or a 30-second video is LAPD is helping to facilitate the raid. They differ very strongly with that and say what they're doing is maintaining order. But and I think people have misinterpreted the boundaries of Sanctuary City, but that is what the Trump administration is saying, is that, our sanctuary city laws then just allow officers to be attacked, the federal officers to be attacked. When, in my opinion, anybody running around masked, carrying guns, and snatching people off the street should not be surprised that crowds develop and are angry.
Has the LAPD been getting more 911 calls about kidnappings that turn out to be ICE arrests?
Not my understanding. I think the chief would have told me. I know that it happened that one time.
Marlo wonders why you think, at least in her perception, ICE isn't going into actual gang or drug territories where one might find some of these very bad criminals that the Trump administration has been pledging to get rid of.
Well, unfortunately, there's no evidence of that. I mean, there's evidence of everything. We know where they're going during the day. So I haven't seen them going to drug dens or, gang hangouts. Not that, I mean, everything is videoed. I haven't heard of any of the raids that have been, carried out in the dark of the night, with no one knowing.
But you're not saying that there are not such criminals, people who are undocumented,
Oh, of
here
course.
legally, and violent criminals. So
Oh,
why would ICE not be going in after them? Is Marlo's question at first.
well, that's my question too. I mean, again, that's how they started. They started saying, gang members, drug dealers, violent criminals. That's what they said. But there's no evidence that I'm aware of that shows that's what they've been doing. They haven't come out and put the people on display. Now, I will tell you, Secretary Noem, when Padilla, Senator Padilla was tackled, Jose, I guess what he was called. She did a PowerPoint and she had 4 criminals. If you paid attention to the PowerPoint, it was the same 4 that were looping around. Well, if there were tons of criminals, why was it just 4 that were put up there?
Mayor, we're wrapping up in a couple of minutes, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. But before we do, I'd like you to give us an assessment of the budget, because so much has been happening in Los Angeles that has affected the budget, looking at hundreds of layoffs from the city staff. Where do matters stand?
Well, where matters stands right now is that when I presented the budget, I called for 1,600 layoffs, but that's because the budget was required by a specific date in our charter. Since then, we've been working to resolve the budget, to close the budget without those layoffs. So the city council took an action that reduced the layoffs by 1,000. I was presented with the budget with 600 layoffs. We're still negotiating with labor, and it is my hope that at the end of the day, which should be in the next couple of weeks, that we will have very few layoffs, if any.
Abby would like to know about the prospect of the cuts to SNAP and Medicaid and the impact in LA, and what mitigation, if any, is possible by a city.
Right, and you know that really goes to the county. So those are cuts that will impact the county, will devastate the city as well, because where do people, you're talking about city residents as well. And so I know we're all waiting to see. I don't think they passed it at the House yet. The last I heard, it didn't look like it was going to pass. But, those are cuts that are just unnecessary. They're just mean-spirited. And the bottom line and the bigger picture is that the Republicans are trying to eliminate what remains of our safety net. It's not as though they need to take food away because of a fiscal crisis. They are choosing to take food away. They weren't able to overturn the Affordable Care Act, so they're gutting the Affordable Care Act slowly but surely by cutting the funding, by putting extra requirements on it. Every 6 months, you have to sign up for health care. When you do things like that, you dramatically reduce compliance with it. So when they failed one way, they went another way, but it's an attack on lower income Americans, and it's their grand goal that they've had ever since FDR, which is to eliminate our social safety net.
Several people have asked, they said, look, we're frightened. What recourse do people who are vulnerable to ICE have? And what options and prospects can people offer who are citizens who feel that they're safe to their fellow Angelinos? I think I
Well,
have that right.
yeah, that's a great question. And the situation is so dire. We're doing things like organizing grocery delivery where people don't want to go to the grocery store and making sure that they have food to eat. And then in terms of how can people be safe, I hate to tell you, I don't know how people can be safe because we never know where ICE is going to be, where there's no rhyme nor reason as to when they are rolling up somewhere. Sometimes I think they just drive up and down the street, and if they see a car wash, they jump up. Why they go after car washes, who knows?
What is the next move as far as this Trump lawsuit that we began our discussion with? Who goes to court when and with what?
Well, we're assembling a legal team to respond to the lawsuit. In the meantime, I'm also responding to the other inquiries from the Secretary of Transportation and also from the Government Reform and Oversight Committee.
Mayor, we always try to end these discussions with a minute of something optimistic and positive. And so I think people, especially now, are very eager to hear what you have to say on that score.
Well, absolutely. Again, our city is united, and I think it's so important that we stay together. And one of the things that we had planned to do, we were going to kick it off in January. We delayed it because of the fires until April. But once a month, we're bringing people together to do beautification projects around the city to prepare for the world. Because in 12 short months, the World Cup will be here. 8 games will be played here. The World Cup will last for 40 days. And so that's going to be 40 days of celebratory activity in our city. And we want to make sure that people stand together. So I would just invite all of your listeners to please participate in Shine LA. Let's get the city ready to welcome the world.
And will the National Guard still be here?
No! What can I say?
Mayor Karen Bass, thank you so much. I hope we have occasion to do this again and update some news and I hope some good news for our beleaguered city and county of Los Angeles.
I would love to come back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mayor Karen Bass talking to us about the presence of ICE agents and federal agents, the National Guard and Marines here in the city of Los Angeles, and the protests about the ICE raids that we have been seeing over the past few weeks. Next week, as you can see, on July 9th, Madeline Brand will be talking with journalist E.J. Dion about progressives and moderates uniting to save our country. We, of course, will invite your questions and your viewership then, and we thank all of you from across the country and around the world who've been able to join us this evening. I'm Patt Morrison. Thank you so much.